Hello, welcome to Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The Union government has announced amendments in the angel tax rules. With these changes, a whole host of investors from 21 countries have been exempted from paying angel tax. These include banks and insurance entities, government and related investors, as well as any entity registered with SEBI in Category 1, as foreign portfolio investors will also not attract angel tax. The Central Board of Direct Taxes has now proposed changes to determine the fair market value and plans to introduce 5 additional valuation methods. The move is anticipated to provide clarity in reflecting actual valuations of new age companies and small businesses. To discuss this further, I'm now joined by Sameer Gupta, National Leader, Tax at EY India. Sameer, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. Give us a sense of how these changes to angel tax norms and especially the countries that have been excluded from this list, including Singapore, Netherlands, Mauritius. How could this exclusion actually impact the amount of money flowing into startups in India?
So thanks, Parikshit, for having me over. And I think you like you rightly said, the intent with which the provisions were introduced was really around the whole black money angle and getting investments from jurisdictions which were not pedigree jurisdictions. And to that extent, excluding jurisdictions like Singapore, Mauritius, Netherlands, that does seem to be a bit of a challenge and a bit of a struggle. Because quite honestly, if you look at the flows of FDI, these countries do have significant investments coming into India. So to that extent, we will have a challenge with respect to pedigreed investments from these very robust jurisdictions and the flow of funds coming into India. And I would go on to say that, while we are looking at startups, even for multinational corporations, a lot of investments come from these jurisdictions where you have regional holding companies in Singapore, where money comes into India for capital expansion into the subsidiaries. And those will also, to a lot of extent, stand affected. So all in all, I do think that it's been a bit restrictive in which they have come out with the provisions.
Right. So you said that this was done to check tax evasion, check money laundering. But if we ask you about the quantum of FDI, quantum of investments also coming into startups from, like you said, pedigreed investors in these jurisdictions, FDI we know fell 16% in FY23. What is the further extent to which it could be impacted as a result of these moves?
So I think to speculate would not be fair, Parikshit. But like I said, we all know that a lot of global supply chains are also moving to India, especially with the advantages that India offers. I do believe that therefore, people will have to rework the entire investment thesis from a valuation standpoint and basically work back with the provisions. It's not that investments won't come from these jurisdictions. It's just that they will now have to, grapple with a lot more articulation with respect to benchmarking the pricing, as well as the effort and energy that will go into valuation pricing will be a big issue, which they will have to factor in. This is one thing which will now need to be taken care of, which wasn't required hitherto.
Right. Just to ask you about multinationals, we have seen how the corporate structures have been, in a way, left out, or this notification has been silent on corporate structures as far as angel tax provisions go. Now, if you've got a foreign company, if you've got an MNC which is infusing fresh capital into its Indian entity, what kind of a scrutiny or what additional scrutiny will it be subjected to as a result of this notification?
Yeah, so like I said, the notification, obviously, if you look at the law change, right, non-resident investors have now been brought into the valuation equation, given that, we already had that in place in the context of resident investors. Now, what is changed, of course, is that the foreign investors will need to work back and see that the value at which they are infusing capital into their subsidiaries is in congruence with the valuation methodologies that have been prescribed. And not just that, a lot of investment is also coming in to India from global funds as well as private equity funds. Because if you look at the FDI investments into India, a lot of money is also coming in from strategic investors, like the funds, like private equity funds. And they will also need to now, work back, looking at these valuation methodologies and bring in the value of investments coming into the equity shares, considering these methodologies that have been prescribed. So it's both. It's not just global parents of MNCs, but it's also strategic investors like private equity funds that will have to work back with these provisions and see that they are in line with the valuation methodologies prescribed.
Could this also delay the approvals? Would this be a direct consequence, delay in approvals for bona fide investments?
Well, from an approval point of view, I would just say that they need to factor this into their timeline for investments. So, a lot of investments at times could be, needs to be very agile from a time frame point of view. So, not from so much from an approval point of view, but more in terms of, your investment cycle from the time you decide to make a strategic invest to actually consummating the transaction. That's where you need to, be clear that you factored in the new provisions that have now been provided. So it's more from that perspective that you need to be able to bring this into play. And also, if you are having investors, so if it's a joint venture investment as well, then you also need to, look at some of the valuation methodologies, both for the non-resident investor as well as the resident investor. So, for instance, I'll just give you an example. If you are having a company which is raising money from a non-resident investor, as you know, for a non-resident investor, now they have increased the valuation methodologies that need to be followed. And if the valuation methodology, like the comparable pricing, gives you like a 200 rupees per share, whereas the DCF valuation is only 150, the non-resident can benefit from the comparable pricing at 200. Whereas the resident investor would still need to be, will get bogged down by the valuation methodology, because for them, the comparable pricing has not been prescribed. So you will have those kind of issues also playing out in terms of the investments coming into India, which is where I think a lot of energy and effort, like I was saying, will now need to be factored in, which wasn't being done earlier.
Very briefly, in 10 seconds, does this impact the ease of doing business, focus of the government? Does this run contrary to that?
Well, I would just say that, while they have tried to bring in provisions which are to attract or to deal with certain objectives, right? The manner in which they have been laid out do come out to be cumbersome, as well as, from the perspective of foreign investors, right? These were things which were not there earlier. They have now been brought in. And I do think that to that extent, there could have been much more that they could have done. So from an ease of business point of view, I think, this does create challenges for the foreign investors.
Right. Thank you very much, Samir, for joining us, talking about the changes to the angel tax norms and how this could be more cumbersome for foreign investors as well. We are going to take a short break here, but don't go anywhere. We focus on Turkey. Yes, Turkey's longest-serving president, Tayyip Erdogan, declares victory in an unprecedented runoff with 52% votes. We take stock of what his win means for Turkey's future, their relations with the world and relations with India. Don't go anywhere. A special discussion coming up.